At the core of every child is a student, and every student is a learner. We have been talking these past 7 weeks in class. Diversity in our classroom is something that we cannot avoid. We will be having to teach students that may not speak the same language that we do, that do not have the same religious views. Perhaps they don't identify the same sexual orientation that we do, or many different things. Perhaps they're not the same ethnicity either. But that does not mean that they do not deserve an education, or that they do not, or are not as smart as the other students in our class. With that in mind, it is important for us to be educated on how we can provide our students the best, the best education that we can. So for our ESL students, I feel like a lot of times we do not acknowledge them in our classroom, and we oftentimes hide them in the shadows instead of allowing them to succeed in their own manner. An example or a strategy that I can think of is allowing those students to be able to turn in some of their work or even present some of their projects in their own native language. I think that it would be a great idea because I feel like those students are still smart and are still able to like say the same information that they would probably say in English just in their native language, and it would help them build confidence with having the ability to speak to their peers up in front of everyone. You know, another strategy I think would be great would be allowing these students to work with groups. I feel like pairing, I feel like pairing these students with their peers helps them gain some of that English that they perhaps do not know. And I feel like it is important for their peers and classmates to kind of build that community and that and allow them to be vulnerable in the classroom. I feel like another strategy is also like visual learning. I think that showing videos and just hands-on instruction is very important for ESL students, so they can not only listen to the instructions but also see them. And finally, another strategy that I could think of is perhaps printing the instructions that you have, or perhaps like depending on what you're trying to teach, have it in their native language too. So that way they can follow along. Perhaps they don't understand every word, but having them follow along in their native language in print is very helpful. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is resources that we could provide as educators. Obviously, for my personal, for me personally, I speak Spanish, so I feel like it'd be pretty easy for me to help students that speak Spanish. Um, but for example, if I get a student from, I don't know, from China, I don't speak Chinese, but I can help provide them resources such as dictionaries that are like Chinese and English, or I can also help them or allow them to use their technology to be able to use Google Translate or other resources. Not only that, but providing them with just making sure that we have people who can help and support them is very important. I know, for example, in hospitals, we are able to get interpreters. I feel like for parent-teacher conference or for important things like that, it is important for us to get interpreters there, and also for us to be able to translate important documents so the families are able to communicate with us and are aware of the policies in our classroom, etc. Now, I know a lot of times there's this often like ideology of if they come to this country, they must learn our language, or this is America, like you have to speak English, etc. But we have to understand that first and foremost, there is no official language here in the United States. So with that being said, English is not the language that everybody has to know. Like, of course, it is the main language spoken, but that is actually like starting to change. We're starting to see a lot more of Spanish being used. So I feel like it's time for schools and education, the education system, to start providing help and providing support for these ESL students instead of shaming them and trying to force them into a quick melting pot and just having them um, assimilate so instantly. It's not easy to assimilate, especially because you have to think about it's not only the language, but it's the culture that you're adjusting to. And I feel like sometimes that is not taken into consideration. You're obviously like trying to adjust into having a new house, having a new, um, perhaps you didn't have a car, or things like that, and it's very hard to leave all of your family and friends behind. So I feel like sometimes we kind of push aside, like I mentioned before, or hide in the shadows, or we take an ESL student as someone who is not able to be as bright as a student that already speaks English, which is not true. And we should actually encourage those students to continue to speak their native language, because it is important for them to stay connected with their roots, as well as that is a great advantage to have in the future. Being bilingual is a great thing, and I feel like we should be honoring that instead of trying to take that away from students. I feel like we should be providing these resources, we should be implementing these strategies as a way to just help our students learn and progress and become great leaders. Um, I personally wish I would have had a teacher who kind of incorporated my native language growing up. Like, that would have been very helpful when I was barely learning English. It would have made it easier for me. But when I was younger, I would get in trouble a lot because I didn't understand what they were telling me. It wasn't because I was a bad kid. It was more just I didn't understand the directions, and they automatically thought that I was acting out. So oftentimes, some ESL students are actually placed in special education classes, and in reality, all they needed was a simple dictionary, or maybe they just needed to be put in a group. And so, in conclusion, I feel like we should take advantage of these students and help them succeed in our classroom, and also allow them to be themselves. And if we do so, we're going to have a great community, and it's also going to be able to just fulfill our job as a teacher. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk.